Buried my husband on a cold Tuesday in March, and on a warm Thursday in November, I watched him heave a 40-pound bag of cypress mulch into the bed of a pickup truck that wasn't his. For 8 months I had been a widow. I knew the shape of that word the way you know a shoe that doesn't fit, the way it rubs the same spot, raw every single day. I had learned to make coffee for one. I had learned to sleep on my own side of the bed and not reach for the warmth that wasn't there anymore. I had stood at a graveside in Beaufort, North Carolina, with the wind coming off the Sound and salt in the air, and I had let our daughter hold my elbow so I wouldn't fold. People kept telling me how strong I was. I let them. It seemed like the polite thing to do. That Thursday, I had only gone to the garden center because my back porch railing had finally rotted through, and I'd decided, in the stubborn way grief makes you decide things, that I would fix it myself. I was standing by the bagged soil, reading the back of a fertilizer sack I had no intention of buying, when I heard a man clear his throat. It was nothing, a small sound, a throat being cleared the way a man clears it when he's about to say something he thinks is funny. But I had heard that exact sound across 43 years of breakfasts and church pews and long car rides to nowhere. My whole body went still before my mind caught up, the way a deer freezes before it knows why. I turned around. He was 3 pallets down, crouched over the mulch, frowning at the prices the way he always frowned at prices, like the store had personally insulted him. The same heavy shoulders, rounder now, the same gray hair that wouldn't lay down no matter how he combed it, the same Walgreens of standing with his weight on his left hip because of the knee he never got fixed. My husband, the man whose name I had watched a stranger carve into granite, the man I had picked a casket for. I dropped the bag of fertilizer. It split on the concrete and spilled across my shoes, and I didn't even look down. "Russell," I said. He kept loading mulch. "Russell," louder this time. My voice cracked right down the middle of his name. He straightened up and looked at me, and for one terrible heartbeat I waited for his face to do what it had always done when he saw me, that little softening around the eyes. Instead, he looked at me the way you look at a stranger who's calling you by the wrong name in a parking lot. Polite, a little wary. "Ma'am," he said. "Ma'am." 43 years, and he said ma'am to me like I was a woman who dropped her purse. "It's me," I said, and I was already moving toward him, my shoes leaving a trail of fertilizer behind me. "It's me, honey. It's your wife." He took a step back. That was the part that broke something loose in my chest, because in all our years together this man had never once stepped away from me. Toward me in arguments, toward me in grief, toward me when his own mother died and he cried into my shoulder in the hospital hallway. Always toward, never back. "I think you've got me confused with somebody," he said, slow and careful. "The way you talk to a person you're afraid might be unwell. My name's not Russell." "Don't," I said. "Don't you dare." I got my phone out. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely make them work, but I pulled up a picture from our last 4th of July, the 2 of us on the deck, his arms slung around me, a flag toothpick stuck in the potato salad behind us. I held it up between us like a warrant. "You look at that," I said. "You look right at that and tell me that's not you." His eyes went to the screen, and something moved behind them. I have replayed that half-second 1,000 times since. A flicker, a tightness in his jaw, a swallow. The look of a man recognizing himself and deciding in real time to keep lying. "That's a nice family," he said quietly. "But that's not me." "I'm sorry. You're going through something hard, I can tell. You should sit down somewhere. Get yourself some water." And then he reached out and put his hand on my shoulder. I knew that hand. I had held that hand at the altar and in delivery rooms and at 3 different funerals. I knew that the tip of his left index finger was gone past the first knuckle, taken clean off by a table saw in 1991 when he was building our daughter's bookshelf and got careless. He used to joke that he gave a finger to her education. I looked down at his hand on my shoulder. The fingertip was gone. "Show me your hands," I whispered. He pulled them back fast, too fast. "I have to go," he said. "I hope you feel better, ma'am. I truly do." He loaded the last bag, slammed the tailgate, and walked away from me across that parking lot like I was weather. I stood there in a pile of spilled fertilizer while a kid in an orange apron asked me twice if I needed help, and I couldn't make my mouth work to answer. Because the thing screaming in my head wasn't grief. Grief I could have handled. Grief I'd had practice with. The thing screaming in my head was a question. If my husband was alive, then whose body had I cried over for 8 months? I should have gone home. Any sensible woman would have gone home and called somebody and let the professionals sort it out. But I have never once in my life done the sensible thing when something mattered, and so I got in my car and I followed that truck. I hung back. 3, 4 cars between us, the way you see them do it on television, except my heart was beating so hard I was sure he could hear it through 2 layers of steel. He drove out of town, past the marina where we used to keep our little boat, past the seafood place we went to for our anniversaries, and then he turned into a part of the county I almost never had reason to drive through. Modest streets, carports instead of garages, plastic toys in the yards. He turned onto a quiet road lined with crepe myrtles and pulled into the gravel drive of a small blue house with a windsock shaped like a fish hanging by the door. I drifted past and parked under a tree half a block down and turned around in my seat to watch. He got out with the mulch, and then the screen door opened and a woman came out onto the steps. She was younger than me, not young, but younger, maybe in her late 50s, with her gray hair in a long braid and a flannel shirt that had clearly belonged to somebody bigger than her. She smiled at him. Not a guest's smile, a wife's smile. The smile of a woman who has watched a particular man walk up a particular set of steps 10,000 times. She came down and kissed him on the mouth and took a bag of mulch out of his arms like they'd done it 100 times. I couldn't hear them. I could only watch them, the easy way they moved around each other, the choreography of 2 people who share a kitchen. And then 2 children came barreling out the door, a boy and a girl, maybe 7 and 9, and they hit him at the knees yelling something I couldn't hear, and he laughed. That laugh. I had heard that laugh in our kitchen for 4 decades. I had fallen in love with that laugh in a movie theater in 1980. And here it was, big and crooked and warm, spilling out of him for children that weren't mine, for grandchildren that weren't ours, in a yard I'd never seen. I realized I was crying only when I tasted it, not sobbing, just water running down my face while I sat in the car my husband had bought me, watching my husband be alive and happy 40 minutes from the grave I'd planted flowers on. I took pictures. The house, the truck, the numbers by the door. My hands shook so badly that half of them came out blurred, but a few were clear. Then the door closed behind all of them, and the porch light came on against the dusk, and I drove home in the dark, not remembering a single mile of the road. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table under the one lamp with our photo albums open all around me, like I was a detective, and my own marriage was the cold case. I lined up the pictures from the garden center against the pictures from our life. The scar on his eyebrow from when he fell off the church roof putting up the Christmas star, the way his ears didn't quite match, the little white patch in his hairline. Every single thing matched. 43 years had written that man's body in the language only I could read, and I read it all night long. Twins don't share scars. Strangers don't have your husband's missing fingertip. At 4 in the morning, I picked up the phone and called my daughter. It rang 4 times before she answered, her voice thick and slurred with sleep. "Mama, it's the middle of the night. Are you okay?" "I saw your father today," I said. The silence that came back was a particular kind of silence. I have thought about it many times since. It wasn't the silence of a daughter worried her grieving mother was losing her grip. It was the silence of a person deciding what to say. Mama. Her voice went soft and careful. We've talked about this. The grief does things. It's normal. Did you take your blood pressure medicine? I followed him home, Kathleen. He has a wife. He has grandchildren. He calls himself a different name, and he's got 2 little kids, calling him Pap. You followed somebody who looked like Daddy to a stranger's house, she said, and now there was a new edge in her voice, a sharpness coming up through the sleep. Do you hear how that sounds? He's missing the tip of his left finger, I said. The one the saw took. Did the man who looked like your daddy happen to be missing that exact finger? The line went dead quiet. I'm coming over, she finally said. Stay there. Don't call anybody else. Don't do anything. I'm coming. She let herself in 40 minutes later with the key she'd had since high school, and she found me at the table surrounded by the wreckage of our family photographs. I didn't say anything. I just handed her my phone and watched her face while she scrolled through the pictures I'd taken. I watched confusion. I watched it slide into something else, and then before she said one word, I watched my own daughter's face fill up with fear, and I knew. A mother knows. Whatever this was, she was already inside it. It looks like him, she said, setting the phone down too gently. But people resemble each other, Mama. It happens all the time. You didn't see his finger in those pictures, I said. But you stopped on the one of his hand, and you stared at it. I watched you. Why did you stare at his hand, Kathleen? She started to cry. I have seen my daughter cry plenty of times in her life. When her dog died, when her first marriage came apart, this was not that. This was a wall coming down. She put her face in her hands and her shoulders shook. And out of all that crying came 2 words, I will never forget. I'm sorry. And those 2 words told me everything before she filled in a single detail, because sorry is not a word you say about a coincidence. Sorry is a word you say about a thing you did. Tell me, I said. My voice came out flat and far away, like it belonged to somebody calmer than me. All of it, right now. She told me. My husband had not died in any boating accident. There had been an accident. That part was real, out past the inlet on a foggy morning 8 months before. But the man who drowned that morning was a deckhand named Tommy, who'd been hired for cash and had no people to speak of. My husband had been on that water too, and when the Coast Guard pulled what little they recovered out of the Sound days later, badly gone, the kind of thing they tell you not to look at, my husband saw a door open and he walked through it. He had been living 2 lives for almost 18 years. The woman with the braid was named Diane. The little ones were her grandchildren, by a son she was raising them for. My husband had a second house and a second life, and a second self, 40 minutes down the road, and the contracting business he was always traveling for, the HVAC company we built from a single truck into a thing with our name on the side of a building, had been funding both of his lives the whole time. How long have you known? I asked. 4 years. She could barely get it out. I found it doing the books. There were 2 of everything, 2 power bills, 2 insurance policies. I confronted him and he begged me. He said it would kill you to find out. He said if you divorced him, you'd take half of everything. The business, the house, your whole future, and there'd be nothing left for any of us. For any of us, I repeated. She wiped her face on her sleeve. When the accident happened, he came to me with a plan. He said if he just disappeared, if everyone thought he was gone, then he could be done with all of it without losing it. The life insurance would pay out, the accounts would pass clean. No divorce, no lawyers, no splitting anything. The life insurance, I said. $750,000. I had signed the claim form at this very table while a casserole somebody's church group made went cold on the counter. He moved most of the real money out first, she said, into accounts under another name, a whole other identity he'd been building for years. The insurance, the survivor benefits, that all came to you so it'd look right. The business he signed over to me before he died, so it wouldn't get tied up. I was supposed to run it and take care of you, give you an allowance, make sure you were comfortable. An allowance. He had decided, the two of them had decided together, that I would spend the rest of my life being managed like a child on a stipend, mourning a man who was eating supper with somebody else. The dental records, I said, because I had been at that funeral. I had been told they'd confirmed it was him. How? She couldn't look at me. The funeral home. The man there. Daddy paid him. I handed off the file. The records they matched were already his. I had sat in the front pew. I had sobbed into a handkerchief while my own daughter, who had handed a bribed funeral director my husband's dental x-rays, held my hand and told me he was at peace now. I didn't scream. I want you to understand that, because I think people expect screaming. By then I had gone somewhere past where screaming lives. I just nodded once, and I said, "Take your purse and go home." "Mama, please, let me." "Go home, Kathleen." She went. I didn't sleep, but I didn't cry anymore either. Something had caught her eyes shut inside me during that long night. By the time the sky went gray over the marsh, I was no longer a grieving widow, and I was no longer a betrayed wife. I was a witness, and I knew, the way you know your own name, that what I had been told was not a sad story about an unfaithful man. It was a crime. Several of them: insurance fraud, identity theft, a forged death, a federal kind of trouble. For 3 days I did nothing at all, and that was the hardest thing I have ever made myself do. My daughter called and called. I watched her car pull into my driveway and sit there and pull back out when I wouldn't come to the door. The whole of my life had trained me to answer, to smooth things over, to be the one who fixed it. I let the phone ring until it stopped, and then I let it ring again. My silence wasn't weakness. For the first time in my life, my silence was a plan. On the 4th morning, I got up before dawn, took a long hot shower, and put on the good slacks and the blouse I'd worn to my granddaughter's graduation. The clothes that made me feel like myself instead of like the woman everyone kept patting on the arm. Then I drove downtown to a frosted glass door on the 2nd floor of the old bank building, the kind of office you pass 100 times and never see, with Pierre Ave Investigations painted on the glass. The man behind the desk was about my age, a retired sheriff's deputy named Dale, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He looked at me a long moment before he said anything. "I need to find a man," I told him, sitting down before he offered. "Is he lost or is he hiding?" "Hiding," I said, "and legally dead." That got the glasses to come down off his forehead. I told him the whole thing, not the part about how my heart felt, just the facts, plain and in order: the accident, the closed casket, the second house, the new name, the children calling him Pap. I showed him the photographs. He listened without once interrupting me, and when I finished, he leaned back and said that what I was describing went a good deal further than a cheating husband, and that it would take time and it would cost money. "I can pay," I said. "I want it documented, not suspected, proven. Bank records, the false name, the property, all of it. I want it so airtight that nobody can sit across a table from me and tell me grief did this to my mind." He named a number. I wrote the check without blinking, and as I tore it off, I felt something I hadn't felt in 8 months. I felt like I had my hands on the wheel of my own life again. Over the next 2 weeks, I learned to be a stranger near my own husband. I went back to that quiet road at different hours in a sun hat and dark glasses, and sat in my car like somebody waiting on a friend. I learned his new schedule. I learned that the man who'd faked his own death to keep from being inconvenienced now coached a little league team on Saturdays and ushered at a country church on Sundays. A good man, the neighbors would have said. I watched the woman with the braid touch his arm the same easy way I used to. I watched him be tender and ordinary and completely at peace, a man who believed his old life was at the bottom of the sound. It wasn't. It was sitting in a parked car at the end of his street, taking notes. Dale called me on a Friday. "You'd better come in," he said. "I've got enough now." The folder he slid across the desk was thick and heavy and real. A driver's license, under a name that wasn't his, issued the spring after the funeral, with his face on it. Bank accounts, and that name with just shy of $900,000 moved into them in the year before the accident. 18 years of duplicate utility bills, 2 mortgages, 2 sets of taxes filed from 2 addresses, and on the last page, phone records. Dozens of calls, regular and long, between my husband and my daughter. Before the accident, after the funeral. All through the months I sat alone in that house, believing I was the only one left who loved him. She hadn't just known. She had stayed in it the whole time. I closed the folder slowly. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. I walked out of that office into the afternoon sun, and something settled in me, calm and cold and final. This was not about rage anymore. It had stopped being about rage somewhere in the second week. This was about refusing to be erased. They had decided I was a problem to be managed, a grief to be waited out, a woman who would mourn quietly forever and never once look up. They had bet their whole crooked plan on my smallness. They had bet wrong. I did not go straight to the law. I went to a lawyer first, and not the kind who'd written our wills. I found a woman named Ms. Alvarez who handled fraud and financial crime, who read the folder in about 20 minutes with her mouth getting tighter and tighter, and who finally set it down and said, "Ma'am, what you've got here is a criminal conspiracy. Your husband committed felony identity theft, insurance fraud, and faked his own death. Your daughter aided it and took the proceeds of the business he signed over to her. There's a strong federal case here, and you're owed restitution besides." "What do you need from me?" I asked. "A confession would seal it," she said, "especially from your daughter, and proof those asset transfers were done with intent." I already knew how to get the first one. I called my daughter that afternoon and let my voice go soft and tired. I told her I wasn't angry anymore. I told her I was old and worn out, and I just wanted to understand the whole thing so I could find some peace with it before I died. I heard the relief come into her breathing like air into a balloon. We made a plan to have lunch the next day, somewhere quiet, just the two of us. That night I bought a little voice recorder at the drugstore and read the instructions twice. The next day, at a half-empty cafe, I let my daughter talk, and she talked. I asked when it started and how the money got moved and who signed what and where the cash from the business he'd quietly sold off had gone. Every answer came easy now, unguarded, because she believed I was still her mother, and her mother was still safe. She never once looked at my purse on the seat beside me. She never once noticed that with every word she said, she was building the case against herself, brick by careful brick. Ms. Alvarez took it all to the U.S. Attorney's Office. The death certificate was challenged. The false identity was flagged. 2 weeks after that lunch, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, federal agents arrested my husband in the gravel driveway of the little blue house with the fish windsock in front of the neighbors who thought he was a good man, while Diane stood on the steps with her hand over her mouth. They picked at my daughter the same morning at the business with our name still on the building. I was at my kitchen table when Ms. Alvarez called to tell me it was done. The house was very quiet. Just the clock on the wall and the refrigerator humming. I thought about the woman I had been 8 months earlier, crying into a pillow, begging a dead man to come back to me. That woman would not have lived through this morning, but I wasn't her anymore. There was one thing left I needed to do, and it wasn't to fight or to explain. It was to look him in the eye. I drove to that little blue house one more time, and this time I parked right out front in the open, and I walked up and rang the bell. The woman with the braid answered. Diane. She looked at me with a stranger's careful politeness, and I understood in that moment that she didn't know either, that she was about to lose her whole world the same way I'd lost mine. I'm here about the man you call your husband, I said. He came to the door behind her, and when he saw my face, the color went out of his. I held out an envelope. These are court documents, I said. You should read them. His hands shook as he opened them. I watched his eyes move down the page, and I watched him understand. What did you do? He whispered. I told the truth, I said. That's all. That's all I had to do. Diane was reading over his shoulder now, and I saw the exact second it reached her. What is this? She said. What does this mean? I'm his wife, I told her gently, because she had never done a thing to me. His legal wife. We were married 43 years. The man you've been living with has been dead on paper for 8 months, so he wouldn't have to lose half his money to me in a divorce. She stepped back like the porch had tilted under her. You told me you were a widower, she said to him. You told me you had nobody. He had somebody, I said. He had me. He went down onto the steps and reached for my hand. Please, he said. Please, after everything, after all those years, you can't do this to me. I did not give him my hand. I didn't do anything to you, I said. You did this. You chose every piece of it. You chose to bury a stranger in your place and let me cry over him. You chose to turn our daughter into a criminal. You chose to make me small so you wouldn't have to be honest. I just stopped letting you. For what we were, he said, for what we had. I was already turning to go. What we had was the realest thing in my life, I said, without looking back. That's exactly why you'll never understand what you threw away. He pled out, in the end, to spare himself a trial. Federal time, real time, years of it, for the fraud and the false death and the stolen identity. The money that could be found was clawed back and returned where it belonged. The business came back to me, and the first thing I did was sell it to a young couple who'd worked there 10 years and deserved it more than anybody. My daughter took a plea too. Less time than her father, but time. I went to her sentencing and I sat in the back, and when it was over, I was allowed a few minutes with her in a small gray room. She cried and said she'd done it. Because she loved me, because she thought it would be kinder, because she thought she was protecting me. I love you, I told her. I will love you until the day I die. But love is not a coupon you get to redeem for the truth. You stole my grief and handed me a lie and called it kindness. You watched me fall apart for 8 months, and you held my hand at a stranger's funeral. Loving you and letting that stand are two different things. And I'm too old to confuse them anymore. She nodded. For the first time in her life, she didn't argue. The months after that were quiet, and the quiet was the good kind. I fixed the porch railing myself after all, and it came out crooked, and I left it crooked because I'd done it with my own 2 hands. I started going back to the women's group at church. I drove up to the mountains in the fall with 2 old friends, and we laughed until we couldn't breathe. I slept the whole night through. A while back, the senior center asked me to come talk to a room full of folks about how to protect yourself, about the kinds of fraud that find people our age, and I almost said no, and then I said yes. I stood up in front of 50 gray heads, and I told them my story, all of it, and I watched a few of the women's eyes fill up because they knew they'd had their own versions, smaller maybe, but their own. Afterward, 3 of them came and held my hands and thanked me, and I understood that the thing that had been done to me could be turned into something that helped somebody else stay standing. One afternoon, I drove out to the cemetery where a deckhand named Tommy lies under a stone with my husband's name on it. I stood there a while, not to mourn exactly. I said a quiet word for that poor man who never asked to be part of any of it, and then I let go of the woman I'd been when I last stood on that grass with my daughter, holding my elbow so I wouldn't fall. That grave never held my husband. It held the version of me that thought loyalty meant being silent, that thought love meant disappearing into somebody else's lie. I drove home in the long gold light, and I didn't look back. And I haven't once since. The thing nobody warned me about was how much of the damage I let happen by being agreeable. For 43 years, I called it loyalty when I stayed quiet, when I smoothed things over, when I decided not to make Russell uncomfortable with a question I already half knew the answer to. I told myself a good wife trusts. But trust without your eyes open isn't trust. It's just looking away on purpose. And Russell built his whole second life inside the space I left for him by never looking too closely. I have to own that. Not the lying, that was his and Kathleen's, but the long, easy silence that made the lying simple. What saved me in the end wasn't anger, though Lord knows I had plenty of it standing in that parking lot. Anger by itself would have had me screaming at him in the garden center and looking like exactly the unwell woman he was pretending I was. What saved me was the 3 days I made myself sit still and think instead of react, going to Dale before I went to the law, letting Kathleen talk over lunch while a little recorder ran in my purse, choosing patience when every nerve in me wanted to burn the house down. The smartest thing I ever did was refuse to act until I understood exactly what I was looking at. But understanding only matters if you can stand the weight of acting on it. Plenty of women would have figured out the truth and then folded because the truth meant turning in their own child. Kathleen is my daughter. I carried her, and I still picked up that phone and let the case go forward because letting it slide would have meant teaching her that loving someone means never facing what you did to them. That was the hardest thing these old hands ever did, and I'd do it again. I think about that poor deckhand sometimes. The stranger in Russell's grave, a man with no one to miss him, used up and discarded so my husband could be comfortable. That's what these things cost when you let them run. Real people, real graves. I won't pretend I came out of it unbroken. I came out of it old and tired and short, 1 husband and 1 daughter, in a manner of speaking. But I came out of it as myself, and for 8 months before that, I wasn't sure I'd ever be myself again. If I could sit across from the woman I used to be, the one holding her daughter's elbow at a stranger's funeral so she wouldn't fall, I'd tell her this: keep your conscience clean enough that you never have to lie to keep your peace. Keep your mind sharp enough to see what's in front of you, even when it hurts. And keep your spine strong enough to act on what you find, even when acting cost you everything you thought you couldn't live without. I found out I could live without all of it. What I couldn't live without was the truth.